A reading from the book of Revelation. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. Here ends the reading of words that give us insight on God. May God grant to us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Friends, will you pray with me? Holy One, we ask that your light may be born in us, so that we might go and be light bearers to the whole world. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each and every one of our hearts be pleasing to you and acceptable in your sight, O God, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Friends, I'd like to invite you, as you feel comfortable, to close your eyes and to picture the nativity scene in your mind's eye. Have you got it? What's it look like? Who is there? What do the people look like? What's the atmosphere like? Is it still and quiet? Is it a little chaotic? Go ahead and open your eyes, but hold on to that mental image that you have. I want to share with you some famous artworks depicting the Nativity. Here's one. You can see Mary holding the child. It looks like a joyful painting, all except maybe Joseph, who's down there in the corner. He looks kind of sullen. But everyone else looks very joyful. This is Luke's narrative. You can see the shepherds there. Here's another one from the 15th century. You can tell it looks like it's from the 15th century. Everyone's admiring Jesus. Or how about this one with Mary gazing down lovingly at baby Jesus? Or this one, Mary and Joseph, they look so devout. They look like they're so impressed with baby Jesus. Here's Rembrandt's version of the Nativity. And here's an ancient depiction of the Nativity. You can see in this one, Mary is in a cave and preparing to be visited by the shepherds and the Magi. Maybe whenever you picture the Nativity, you just think of joy, like this John August Swanson painting. That's very joyful. Or perhaps some of you, whenever you think about it, have a more historically accurate depiction in your mind. You might see them as Middle Eastern. Here's a picture of a Middle Eastern Jewish family in a cave. I'll tell you, it was pretty tricky to find pictures of the Nativity where the characters were not white. That's pretty problematic. Perhaps whenever you see the Nativity, you see them as yourself, or you see your own culture reflected. But I can almost guarantee that whenever you picture the Nativity, you do not see it like this. Mary fending off a seven-headed dragon. Have you ever pictured it like this? Here's another one where Mary is taking on that seven-headed dragon. Or here she is with her cosmic power shining forth. Have any of you ever heard this birth narrative that we saw in today's scripture lesson? The one where Jesus is about to be devoured by a seven-headed dragon? I mean, you've heard the one with the shepherds, you've heard the one with the magi, but have you heard the one with the seven-headed red dragon with 10 horns? It's, of course, no surprise that this is found in the book of Revelation, which has all kinds of weird stuff. I thought this was an appropriate way to end 2020, which has seemed like kind of an apocalyptic year, by looking at the book of Revelation, which I have preached on more this year than at any other point in my ministry. This is also a story that some of us read about in Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan's book, The First Christmas, but didn't really have time to talk about. And so I thought it might be fun to talk about it today. And actually, I think once we understand what's going on here, is pretty meaningful for how we look forward to 2021. Before we can really understand this story, though, we have to understand another one. In Greco-Roman mythology, there's a story about Zeus, the great god of the pantheon, conceiving a child with Leto, also known as Leda. And she's immortal, and the child that is to be born is Apollo, the god of light. Just when Leto is getting ready to give birth to Apollo, there is this great beast called Python waiting there to devour the god of light, Apollo. But at the very last minute, Zeus swoops in and he takes up Leto and Apollo to safety. Does that sound familiar? John is, of course, using that story and reframing it here in Revelation. Here, instead of Apollo, the god of light, it is Jesus, the light of the world, who's about to be born. And instead of Python, this mythical beast, it is a seven-headed red dragon. What's that about? Well, it's not just the stuff of childhood nightmares, as it turns out. In the ancient world, the seven-headed dragon could only have referred to one thing. Can you guess what it is? Rome and the Roman Empire. Listen to this. According to this mythology about Rome, Romulus and Remus founded Rome on a hill. And there were 6 other settlements on 6 separate hills, and between them there were marshy valleys. And as those settlements began to interact more, they drained those marshy valleys and they put in marketplaces where people interacted. And eventually all those settlements came together and they became the city of Rome, the city of 7 hills, as it was known. And so this seven-headed beast in the ancient world could only have been referring to Rome, the city of 7 hills. And in case you don't believe me, listen to what happens next in the story. This beast goes into heaven and loses an epic battle and is cast down to earth to rule the world from the city of 7 hills. This is incredible. John takes a well-known myth and he reinterprets it to be about Jesus. But there's more to it than this. Remember, in the myth, it's Apollo who's about to be born, the god of light. Well, you may remember that I've told you that in the ancient world, whenever Jesus' followers were saying that he was the Son of God, they weren't just making a theological statement. They were also making a political statement because there was only one Son of God in the Roman Empire, and it was Caesar Augustus. But he wasn't just the son of any god, he was the son of the God Apollo. This is brilliant, right? You take the story about Apollo's birth, and by nature, Caesar Augustus's birth, and you flip it on its head to where now Jesus is the one being born, and it is Caesar Augustus, Rome, the Roman Empire, that's about to devour Jesus. And of course, they did. They executed Jesus, and they persecuted the earliest Christians. What's more, John of Patmos, who wrote the book of Revelation, was living during a time of great persecution. And that infamous mark of the beast that we find in Revelation, 666, whenever you use the Jewish ancient practice called gematria, of encoding names with numbers, that decodes to Caesar Nero, the emperor of the Roman Empire, who reigned when both Peter and Paul were executed. So you see that this is a really powerful story, right? Speaking truth against the Roman Empire while coding it with one of their own stories. Whenever you view it like that, that's a really powerful story, because it says that Apollo, that Caesar Augustus is not the light of the world, but instead it is the God whom we know through Jesus, who is the light of the world. As we read in the Gospel of John, written by a different person than the John of Revelation, as we read in the Gospel of John, Jesus is the light that darkness cannot overcome. And elsewhere in the Gospels, we find that we are the light of the world, called to be a city on a hill. Not a city on 7 hills. A city on a hill shining brightly. We are called to shine that light forth that darkness does not overcome. Now, I think that's a powerful way to enter into 2021. Thinking about how the light of God is born into us, and about how we are called to share that light with a world that is living in darkness. 2020 has been a terrible year. And I know that we will be glad to flip the page of that calendar and go into 2021. But we can't think that simply by turning that page that all of our problems will be over. I mean, this year has brought to light so many things in our society. We've seen racism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia all run rampant. And that's not going to be solved just by going into the next year. It's not going to be solved just by having a new person in the highest elected office of the land, although that's going to help. And we are also going to be dealing with the long-term impacts of this pandemic for years to come. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. I mean, we can see the vaccine going out. We can see multiple vaccines being administered right now. Some have even been able to get it who are associated with congregation, which is wonderful. We are so grateful that in the next few months, we might see some semblance of normalcy, or whatever the new normal is going to be, and we are hopeful about that. Yet these long-term impacts of the pandemic are going to be with us. We have still lost loved ones during this time and not been able to mourn in the way that we need to. Children have still been physically separated from their schools. We have missed precious time with friends and family. And I'm sure we will see the mental health impacts of this become even more exacerbated. This is a time when we need to let that light of God be born into us. We need to hold on tightly to that hope, to let that light of God be within us so that we might share it with the world, so that we might go into 2021 hopeful and full of light. No, the problems won't be solved just by flipping the calendar, just by going into 2021. But if we recognize that God promises to be with us, if we recognize that we are on this journey together as a community, if we recognize that God's light is a source of hope for us and for the world, and we share that, well, that's a pretty powerful way to enter 2021. So friends, I wish you a year of light, a year of life, a year of hope. And for the love of God, may 2021 be a better year than 2020. May it be so, and Happy New Year.